ReZero Season 3 Episode 12 marks the end of the battle against Regulus Corneas and the end of one of ReZero's most controversial villains, so let's talk about it. Before starting, I'll let you know that I will be making a full analysis regarding Regulus' character after Season 3 ends, so if you want to understand him more or if you want to know why novel readers regard him so highly, make sure to subscribe and watch out for my analysis video. The episode starts with Emilia racing to get to the wives after being tasked by Subaru to figure out the secret to Regulus' authority. When Emilia returns, she finds the wives still in their original positions, not having moved due to Regulus not giving the order to. When 184 asks Emilia about what happened to their husband, she responds that they're still fighting him and they need the wives' help to defeat Regulus. Emilia, wanting to save the wives no matter what, declares that while she knows the battle's outcome doesn't decide who's right or wrong, she knows that if Regulus isn't defeated, he'll trample upon something that's precious. When 184 asks Emilia if what's precious is her life, she responds by saying that while indeed life is precious, it isn't the only thing that's precious. After Emilia says this, 184 angrily tells her that for the wives, living is the only thing that's precious, as after all that was stolen from them, it's their only act of defiance towards Regulus. If their lives are stolen, then Regulus would crush the wives' resolve and everything will be his. Upon hearing this, Emilia asks 184 about her name. When asked why, she responds by saying that even though she didn't know 184's name, she still selfishly asked for a favor from her. When 184 tries to dismiss Emilia's question, she responds by saying that she's a half-elf, continuing to remark about how everyone is different, yet despite those differences, they can come to terms and understand each other. Hearing this, 184 responds angrily, asking Emilia not to toy with her. She declares how Regulus was content with the wives just being his obedient dolls, and that the wives continued to live as that was their only meaningful act of resistance against him. As 184 continues to rant angrily, she asks Emilia what she knows about the wives. Emilia responds by saying she knows they're kind and that they're crying for help. Emilia continues to remark about how everything about the wives shows that they're crying for help, and to help save them, Emilia needs them to help her. The interaction between the wives and Emilia just now heavily parallels the conversation between Subaru and Beatrice at the end of Season 2. This episode relies heavily upon callbacks and parallels to the previous events in the narrative, something that's rather ironic since the namesake of the episode doesn't have that. It'll be something I'll touch upon later. The wives losing all hope of freedom from Regulus and choosing to live in obedience instead of having hope that they'll be saved one day, considering hope for something that might never come as a seed of despair, is also a heavy parallel to Beatrice's own character arc in Arc 4, with Betty losing any and all hope of that person ever coming. It's, as I said before, another great parallel to earlier story event. The conversation between Emilia and 184 ties beautifully into Emilia's own character arc. Emilia's character arc is very heavily focused on individuality and reaffirming one's identity. Within ReZero, names are an integral part of one's identity, and it could be why when one's name is eaten by gluttony, they lose themselves. By Emilia asking 184 for her name, Emilia reaffirms the wife's identity, something that Regulus stripped them of. Regulus calling his wives by numbers is his act of objectification, and it's his act of stripping the wives of all their identity and individuality. When Emilia asks 184 for her name, she reaffirms her being and lets her break free from Regulus's monstrous grasp. Upon hearing Emilia's heartfelt speech, 184 decides, before telling her own name, to ask the other wives if they even liked Regulus, to which they all respond by saying that they despise him. Upon hearing their words of hatred, 184 smiles, then she tells her name to Emilia. Her name is Sylphie. After Emilia comments on how wonderful her name is, Sylphie, representing all the wives, declares their wish to support Emilia in defeating Regulus. You see the wives and Emilia contemplate about Regulus's power, trying to figure out what kind of power it is. The wives are skeptical about Regulus leaving something so valuable to them. When Emilia asks the spirits to check the bodies of the women, the spirits confirm her fears and tell her that the women's heartbeats are strange, right before we cut back to Subaru versus Regulus. In the novels, we're told that Subaru had been stalling Regulus for almost 10 whole minutes. During that time, Pristila's third district was almost entirely destroyed. It's a minor gripe of mine, but I dislike how the anime portrays Regulus's authority. It's nowhere near as intimidating and dangerous as it is portrayed in the novels. That aside, Subaru utilized Regulus's desire to see his death to stall for such a long time. Regulus's twisted tendencies and the need for recognition are put on full display here. It's something that heavily parallels Arc 3 Subaru's own actions, and ironically it plays a big part in Regulus's own downfall. When a seemingly injured Subaru tells Regulus that he knows his ability is related to the wives, Regulus responds by calling him cunning, before talking about how he entrusted his heart to his precious wives, how he loves them equally and how their responsibilities are divided equally, doing the bare minimum for a man who takes up multiple wives. Regulus continues ranting about how he's not a greedy man and he doesn't desire the material wealth that guys like Subaru wish for. After that, we get some scenes of Subaru dodging Regulus's attacks as Subaru reveals he faked his injury before we cut back to the chairs. When the wives realize that Regulus planted his heart in them, they're crushed and they quickly move to end their own lives. Emilia is shocked by their decision and attempts to stop them. She laments about her own powerlessness and how if the wives die, why did she even leave the forest? She continues to lament about how her lack of power will only lead more people to die, something that heavily parallels Season 1 Subaru. Right before the wives move to end their own lives, Emilia stops all of them. After she thought hard about what she should do, she decides to freeze the wives, putting them in a ready state to stop their heart. Another parallel here is how Emilia's freezing of the wives parallels their freezing of Elior Forest. But unlike in Elior Forest, where she robbed hundreds of their lives, her freezing the wives is something that prevents their lives from ending. When Regulus sees the frozen church, he's in great distress. He starts ranting about how Subaru and Emilia could so easily take what he loves. He asks Subaru if he's even human, if he's satisfied with what he's done, right before Regulus is slammed with multiple icicles, with Emilia declaring that these are the divorce papers from his wife. An interesting aspect of Regulus' character is how he constantly attempts to twist the narrative into him being the victim. We see this earlier this season when he acts like Subaru and Reinhard would have forced him to kill his own wives. It's an interesting bit of characterization that shows us how truly twisted he is. Right after Regulus breaks out of the frozen canal, showing us that his authority was still in effect, he asks Emilia how she's planning to take responsibility for what she's done, mockingly asking her if she miscounted the wives. Emilia affirms that she will never miscount the number of lives. This realization causes her to tell Subaru that Regulus' final heart is beating inside of her. Regulus bursts into laughter upon hearing this. He talks about how now they're at a dead end and how the noose is tightening around their necks. He mockingly offers Subaru an ultimatum: kill Emilia and see his limits or don't and lose. While Emilia was willing to go forward with such a thing, Subaru could never let such a thing happen. An interesting monologue that's cut from the anime is Subaru's lament. He laments about how he could never kill Emilia and how he's choosing the life of the one he loves over the many lives that would be saved by killing Regulus. After Subaru finishes monologuing, Regulus begins mocking him. Regulus had realized that Subaru was the one who gave the speech earlier. He mocks Subaru about thinking he's tough shit when he only killed Betelgeuse, a failure before and after becoming an archbishop in Regulus' eyes. Upon hearing Regulus' mockery of Betelgeuse, Subaru comes to a realization. He asks Emilia if she trusts him, and when she tells him yes, he decides to make the ultimate gamble. He'll use the unseen hand to crush Regulus' heart from inside Emilia. In the novels, it's said that the unseen hand felt gratitude. It had rejoiced, it cheered when Subaru called upon this power, and ironically, the same power that was used to kill many was used to save the life of one. When she felt the hand go inside her, Emilia smiled, remarking about how that's where juice was. After Subaru collapses due to the excruciating pain of using the unseen hand, Emilia goes to support him. It's a scene that parallels Fortuna helping Juice when he started using the unseen hand himself, which might be why Regulus just watched aimlessly. When Regulus asks the duo what the hell happened, Subaru's response to him is simple: your shoes are wet. Right after the lion's heart inside of Emilia is crushed, she moves quickly, kicking Regulus in the face. She then punches Regulus 53 times, one strike for every wife killed, right before slamming him with a barrage of icicles. One more strike for herself, I guess. When Subaru sees that Regulus is still alive after Emilia's countless attacks, he realizes that Regulus can use Lion's heart with his own heart, but it's something that causes him excruciating pain. After getting his ass kicked, Regulus begins to mold about how unfair a 2v1 is, asking Subaru for a duel as it wouldn't be fitting for a knight like him to hide behind his lady scared. Subaru agrees to the 1v1 as Reinhard returns back to the planet from the sky. When Regulus asks Reinhard how he did such a thing, he responds by telling Regulus he made one mistake. He shouldn't have thrown Reinhard towards the moon. Right before Reinhard gives his name and title before throwing Regulus like a ragdoll in the sky. Ironically, Reinhard affirms his own existence by saying his name right before slamming Regulus. As Regulus continues flying through the sky, he continues ranting to himself. He wonders why he's being persecuted like this, why this is happening to him, despite being the most satisfied existence in the world. He asks why they're smiling at him. He doesn't want to be seen. He doesn't want to be heard. His first wife never smiled even after he killed all those close to her. She didn't smile because she didn't need to smile, not because he couldn't make her. He rejects the idea of people understanding each other. He thinks about how people are alone as they're born and as they die. He continues to ask why all his wives smiled when he killed them, why they're smiling at him. What's so funny about him? It's interesting seeing his reaction as his illusion of connection with his wife is completely shattered. As Regulus continues to rant to himself as he's flying in the sky, Reinhard lands on his back mid-air, preparing to deliver the final blow to Regulus Corneas. It's the first time we see the mask slip off Regulus, his emotions on full display as he's on this door. It's the first time he's been in a situation like this for over 100 years. He deluded himself into thinking he can't be wrong, because if he's wrong, then all the walls he's built around himself would fall apart. Regulus is how his authority represents his own rejection of change. While Subaru improves and changes himself to be someone worth associating with, Regulus is stuck in the past. He refuses refuses to change because changing would mean acknowledging his fluid, something that his fragile ego couldn't handle. I think it's direct commentary from the author on the nature of most escapist isekai protagonists, being represented by Regulus here. When Reinhard lands on Regulus in mid-air, he comments about how normally he'd sheath his sword once his opponent lost the will to fight, but that can't be done with Regulus. When Regulus calls Reinhard a monster, Reinhard accepts the title, calling himself a monster who hunts monsters, before telling Regulus it's time for him to accept his fate, as he throws Regulus into the ground. When Regulus activates the lion's heart right before hitting the ground, he starts basically falling through the ground. He wonders what will happen if he keeps falling, and if he'll fall beyond the great waterfall if he continues losing lion's heart. Fearing what might happen if he keeps it on, Regulus deactivates his authority. Upon deactivating his authority, the full force of the impact hits him. His bones shatter, his organs are obliterated, his body is crushed. The last century of hunger and thirst slams into him. As he stops falling through the world, he tries to climb up, holding onto his life, or rather onto his grudge, to kill Subaru, Emilia, and Reinhard, right before coming to the realization that Emilia was the same brat from 100 years ago. As water started to flow into the hole he carved, he begins to lament not wanting Emilia to rejoice after his death. He didn't want her to rejoice after avenging Jus and Fortuna. He didn't want her to rejoice after avenging her parents. When Subaru asks Emilia why she doesn't seem too relieved upon defeating Regulus, she ponders about how Regulus was somewhat familiar to her, but she has no idea where she met him before. Ironically enough, Regulus's final wish to not be remembered by Emilia would come true. Overall, Regulus is a pivotal antagonist to all three of our heroes. To Reinhard, he represents the worst version of the strongest, one who uses his power to have others live in fear. To Emilia, he represents an oppressor who tried to steal away her autonomy, making him parallel other obstacles in Emilia's life, such as Puck, Roswell, and an earlier Subaru. And to Subaru, he represents the most twisted version of himself, an image of how Subaru could have fallen in arcs 3 and 4. Out of all the episodes this season, this episode is probably my favorite one yet. While I do have many gripes with the adaptation, it's still my favorite episode of the season so far. Regulus Corneas is a named episode not featuring his backstory seems like a direction choice made to be different to the other episodes bearing a character's name in my opinion. It represents how Regulus is an empty person with an empty past, ironically reflecting Arc 3 Subaru's view of himself. Direction-wise, this episode is probably the strongest of this season, and I especially adore the title card, where most of Regulus's name is obscured into the white background, with only the kanji Ko being visible, a kanji that ironically means child. Regarding cut content, much like the previous episode, I definitely suggest reading the Regulus chapter in the web novel during your own time, as it's a pretty good read and it gives a lot of great characterization to him. As a character, I consider Regulus to be one of, if not the most interesting antagonist in ReZero, but that's a take that's probably very controversial amongst anime onlys. I'd say this is where my main gripe with the episode comes, as around 75% of Regulus' speech while he's in mid-air is cut. Regulus' portrayal this season so far hasn't been very good in my opinion, which is why I think anime onlys don't rate him as highly. As I've said before, I will be making a much longer, more fleshed out analysis of Regulus that will delve more into his personality and character, so make sure to subscribe to see it. If you liked this video, please like, comment and subscribe, as this helps a lot with the YouTube algorithm. If you like my content, check me out on TikTok, Instagram and Twitter, as I do make content there occasionally. And if you like the thumbnails, please check out my friend at Schult on TikTok and Twitter, as he's helping me out a lot on these videos. Overall, if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.